At the end of the day, if you're looking to build a career, you want to build a career in something that has a lot of growth potential, has a lot of openings, and that there's just a lot of work to go around. Hey, what's up? It's Coin. I'm your host of the Get Into Cloud podcast, and today we're talking about which cloud should you start learning to begin your cloud journey. And I talk to a lot of people who rightly are interested in making sure that they don't go far down a path learning a particular cloud, this one or that, end up in a dead end and potentially have to start over back at the beginning. Everyone wants to put in the right amount of effort to learn a cloud that's going to be fruitful for them and it's going to help them have a good career. And so I get asked all the time, which cloud should I look at? This person is telling me to look at Azure. People working in Azure make more money. People working in GCP make good money. There are a lot of openings. There aren't a lot of professionals in that area, So people are being told a lot of different things about which cloud to choose. And I think my opinion is best summed up with a story. And at a previous job that I worked for, I actually worked for a public cloud company that competed against AWS and was a public cloud company for small and medium-sized businesses. So we did servers and kind of IaaS cloud backed by VMware, and I was part of the team that ran the VMware. I started out VMware engineering, ended up at the VMware architect at that company. And then I had a counterpart on the Hyper-V side. So we ran two different hypervisors to virtualize our clients' computers. So we had a software front end, and they could choose between Hyper-V and VMware, which doesn't make any sense because the customer really shouldn't know either way what kind of virtualization that's being used on the back end, but that was the decision the company had made. So I became really good friends with my counterpart, and he was a Microsoft guy through and through. So he managed Hyper-V, but he had worked at Microsoft before, if I remember correctly, on one of their set-top box companies. So he'd worked at Microsoft. He was big into Hyper-V, and we both eventually left that company, and both of us went into cloud, and he went into Azure and I went into AWS. And so it was a couple of years later, I was doing AWS consulting. The company that I worked for decided they wanted an Azure practice. So as they were looking to build that practice, I reached out and said, hey, my company's looking to build an Azure practice. You should come join us. I think you'd be a good fit. You love Azure, you're good at it. Let's, and then we can work together again. And so he did. He ended up interviewing. He got hired on, and he started as a part of our Azure practice in Atlanta. And almost immediately, he ended up getting put on AWS projects, right? Because you think about, there just wasn't enough Azure work for him to stay 100% busy on Azure activity. So he'd do some Azure work, he'd end up on an AWS project, and then he'd do a little more, and then maybe between the overlap and not wanting to switch people out on projects, he might end up on multiple AWS projects in a row. And he ended up learning AWS and getting really good at AWS as well. And eventually he left the company and went to a financial services company as an AWS architect there. So I don't remember what his title was, but he, really high up doing AWS cloud architecture and solution architecture for a financial services company. And I say that to say that at the end of the day, when it comes to choosing cloud, if you're looking to get into the business, you're looking to get started in the business, AWS should be your first choice, okay? Because that's where the work is, right? At the end of the day, if you're looking to build a career, you want to build a career in something that has a lot of growth potential, has a lot of openings, and that there's just a lot of work to go around. And in my experience across all of the companies, consulting firms that I've worked at, companies that did AWS, Azure, and GCP, in most of those companies, a majority of the work is AWS work. And then there is, a fraction of the work is Azure, and then a fraction of that work is GCP. And that tends to be what it's like. If I were going to break it down, it'd be like 75% AWS work, maybe 15 to 20% Azure, and then 5 to 10 GCP. And that's the way it's always broken down. So I would say if you're looking to get started in a career in cloud, and that AWS is the place to start. And some other advantages, that's the obvious reason, is that there's just a lot of work, so the chances of you getting hired is much higher. But also you look at the education pathways, you look at the certification pathways and training, you look at the available training. So if you're joining groups on LinkedIn and you're reaching out to different folks, you'll see a lot of folks that are generating educational content for AWS, way more than for the other clouds. And there'll be people who are doing it for the other clouds, but there's just a massive amount more training and education material that's available for AWS. The community is huge. It's a very large community. And so you're able to connect with people that are doing AWS, have done AWS, can answer questions about AWS. So you have a lot more to lean on when you go searching for issues or problems, things you're trying to solve. You can find folks that have done a project similar to yours in AWS. So the network effects of having it be so popular is that it makes it a lot easier to get into. When you look at their community programs, their funding, their free tier, there's just a lot of different programs that they pour money into to help people get into AWS and learn more about AWS. They have funding programs and scholarships to go to reInvent and things like that. So it is really a good place to start. And of course, they have a lot of customers. So chances are, if you're dealing with a very large company or a company you've heard of, they will likely have some presence in AWS. Even if they're not primarily on AWS, they'll have a presence in AWS. And what I've seen in all of the dealings that I've had with a lot of corporations generally falls down that the default is to go to AWS. And then if you're a company that competes with AWS in some sphere, so maybe retail, maybe you're a retailer and you compete with Amazon, you won't go to AWS because you don't want to feed your competitor. So you'll look at going to Azure. Azure would be the next step because most companies are going to use Microsoft M365 maybe for Office. Maybe they've already purchased Office and Windows licenses and things like that. So they already have a relationship with Microsoft. So then going to Azure might be the next step that a company might use if they have a close relationship with Microsoft. Or if they are a company that is a SQL Server heavy kind of company, .NET is their core stack, then they might be a natural fit for Azure. And then the third group are people who compete with AWS and hate Microsoft. So those are the folks that have already using Gmail for their company's email before GCP was invented, and then once GCP was invented, they decided to go to Google's cloud instead. Those are often very big retailers who for some reason have been in some sort of strife with Microsoft. Microsoft's a very hard company to work with. And so they often run afoul of other major corporations. And so those corporations just decide to go down the Gmail and the Google Office route, and then going to GCP just makes sense. But for you might consider Azure if you already have familiarity with SQL Server and the Azure stack. You might consider going to GCP if you have a background in marketing or data and analytics that have or development where you've used GCP before, and have some kind of, already have a little bit of a leg up in there. You might decide to use another cloud if your company is using another cloud, right? So you'll want to, even if you're in a position that's not a cloud position yet, let's say you're a sysadmin in the on-prem data center environment for a company that has Azure, then that's going to be your best bet to get access to Azure, to meet people that know Azure, and potentially be able to ramp up on that technology and work your way into the Azure team, the cloud team at your existing company, right? So those are the real considerations about choosing. AWS would be your default, but if you're looking for a choice for choosing something that's not AWS, then you want to just think about, do I have some familiarity with another cloud? Do I work at a company that would give me access to that cloud? Or do I, have close personal relationships with someone who could potentially be in at a company and they are on another cloud? Now, the main three clouds, of course, are AWS, Azure, and GCP. If you live in the United States, and I would stick with those three. I wouldn't fuss with Oracle or Alibaba or IBM Cloud. None of those clouds ever even show up on the radar for most cloud work, right? So those are very niche kinds of clouds, and unless you had some compelling interest to be involved with those, I wouldn't do it. Even if your company used Oracle Cloud, if you're looking to get a cloud role, you could end up squeezing yourself into a niche where it would be hard for you to find other work because there just won't be a lot of folks using Oracle Cloud, right? And this kind of, I'll use that to talk about, in general, you'll want to think of yourself as having T-shaped capabilities, right? As you learn, you want to go deep on one cloud. You'll learn cloud concepts that would cover all three clouds, right? So if you're learning about AWS, you'll learn about a concept of hybrid cloud, the idea that you would have an on-prem data center and then you would have a cloud data center and you would connect them together with networking. In AWS, that networking is called direct connect. And it's this idea that you could have a hybrid situation where some things that need, quote unquote, need to run on-prem could continue to run on-prem, and things that you want to run in the cloud could run in the cloud. And there's direct networking connectivity there in AWS Direct Connect. In Azure, they have the same thing. It's called Express Route. So it's a different name for the technology, but you need to understand conceptually what it means to have hybrid cloud and why someone might use hybrid cloud in this situation. And the term for this is called T-shaped capabilities. What it means is you want to go really deep on one cloud, right? In this case, let's say AWS, you go really deep on AWS, and then you go across the other clouds. You'll have some shallow knowledge about, Azure and GCP, generally speaking, and maybe also understand a little bit about security and networking and data and, operations. You'll want to have some general knowledge across all of kind of IT and cloud technology, and then have deep understanding into a particular cloud and just go heavy into one cloud. I wouldn't recommend going light in a bunch of clouds at the beginning. I would recommend just starting deep in one cloud, and then you can pick up the rest of the knowledge kind of as you go to kind of spread into your T-shaped capabilities. Okay, well, that's it for this episode. Really just wanted to kind of address the question of where you should start, give you some options. There are some good reasons to not choose AWS, but the default, I think, in most cases, AWS should be where you start. And if you haven't yet, you should look at the Cloud Practitioner exam. There's a lot of content that's freely available that can help you study for that exam and take that certification. It's really a great place to start to learn about the general concepts for cloud concepts, but also get your first cert under your belt and get you really kind of moving down the pathway to starting your cloud career. Well, thanks so much for listening. Have a good day.